Join me as I take on the challenge to read every single book that has featured in the YA and adult FairyLoot subscription box. Like literally every single book. And if my calculations are correct, there are around 145 books and I want to try them all. Hello fellow book lovers, I hope you are having a really lovely day. My name is Annie, welcome to my channel if you are new here, which let's face it, most of you are because this channel has only been going for like 2 weeks. So FairyLoot has been going since 2016 and it is a book-based subscription box that sends a book to your door along with other bookish goodies like tea towels or bookmarks or sometimes like cushions and blankets and keyrings and just all sorts of really cute bookish fun merch stuff. There are a couple of boxes. They have a YA box, an adult box. I think they might have a romance box now. I am only really interested in the YA box, but there are also some books in the adult boxes that pique my interest. Mostly they are fantasy books. Occasionally there are some that are fantasy, but they have another element, like maybe dystopian or romance. Some of those I am going to avoid. I know I said I'm going to read them all, and I mean all. Like I do want to try and read them all, but there are some that I know that I am going to DNF because I don't like dystopian, I don't like really heavy romance, I don't like anything that's like really like on page sex scenes, like they're not for me, so I know I would DNF them, but I would like to give them a go anyway. So I am not, and I have never been, a subscriber to FairyLoot. Let's put that out there. I am a Kindle reader, so I am not going to subscribe to a book box at this stage in my life when I am not going to read these books. I have signed up. There is a very long waiting list, so the likelihood is I will not get to the top of the list anytime soon, because my plan is that if I read enough of the books on the list that have already been released and I enjoy them, then I will give the box a go, because I have explained I have a trophy shelf, so when I have read a book on my Kindle and loved it, I will purchase it and put it on my shelf. And I have actually purchased a couple of FairyLoot editions secondhand because I loved the book and the special editions are stunning, so I wanted them. So if there are enough of these books that I fall in love with and then want a physical copy, it makes sense to me to subscribe to the box because I am getting the books at a good price. And then maybe I will read them on my Kindle, and when I have loved it, it will be on my shelf. But I want to know that I'm going to love the books first before I subscribe, if that makes sense. But I know the waiting list is very long, so I have some time to get a good idea. I have made a spreadsheet. I absolutely love a spreadsheet of every single book that has ever been released. And once I have read it, if I like it, I highlight it green. If I didn't, I highlight it red. Very simple. And then I will have a better picture of the percentage of books that I have enjoyed over the ones that I haven't enjoyed, and that will sort of let me know if these boxes would be worth my money. And I'm also doing the same for Owl Crate and Illuma Crate and Locked Library. Now I am hoping that this is successful and I end up loving the books and I do get to subscribe. So as I've said, there are around 145 books that have been released in FairyLoot boxes, including YA and adult. That is a lot. That is a lot of books. Luckily, I don't have to read all 145 for this reading series. Some have already been read, some I already own, and some my library have. My library have an ebook service, which is absolutely wonderful. I don't think I'm going to read all 145 in this year. I think that's impossible, but we can make a good start. It's really hard to know where to start because there are so many books. But luckily 2 came up on my TBR generator for January, and there was one at the library that I was really eager to read, so it just made sense to start there. If you haven't seen how I generate my TBR, I will link my January TBR up above, and I go into it a lot more in depth, but I use the StoryGraph recommendations feature to pick my TBR each month, and 2 FairyLoot books came up on this month, so those are the ones I'm going to get to first. So we have 2 books from the adult box and 1 from the YA box, which is quite surprising since I primarily read YA. We have the Foxglove King, Spells for Forgetting, and the Crimson Moth. I will go more into depth on what each book is about when we get to them. I have to say, I'm most excited for the Crimson Moth because that one seems right up my street and there's been a lot of hype about it. It's very popular. The Foxglove King I'm interested in, but it intimidates me a little bit. And Spells for Forgetting sounds really mysterious and intriguing, but I'm unsure how much fantasy is in this book, and I'm used to reading quite fantasy heavy books, so I'm unsure as to how I will find this one. But the only way we will know is if I read them. So let's get into the video and my thoughts on each book, and we will see at the end if my predictions were right. So the first book book that I am going to read is The Foxglove King by Hannah Whittam. This is the first in a trilogy. The first 2 books have been published. The third one is releasing this year. I know it sounds awful, but I'm kind of hoping I don't like this book just so I don't have to continue another series this year. But we will have to see. We'll have to see what I think. So this book is an adult fantasy and it follows Law, who is a poison runner and a smuggler. And she can use illegal death magic called Mortem. She is caught using Mortem and she is taken by these special monks called the Presque Mort, and they work for the king. And they are allowed to use Mortem in order to protect the city. So it's illegal for everyone else, but it's okay by them. They've been sanctioned by the king. It's fine. So they take Law to the king and she is expecting to be punished. She's been caught using illegal magic. She is expecting a punishment, but instead she is met with an offer. So the king tells her that villages in the kingdom are like wiping out. People are dying really suddenly, seemingly like randomly, and he wants to know why. So he tasks Law with the job to figure out why and potentially stop it. And if she refuses, she will die. She will be sentenced to death for using the magic. So she kind of has no choice. The death magic and the mystery element of this book really intrigues me. That sounds like something I will enjoy, something I want to know more about. I've enjoyed books with death magic in before, and I want to know more about what's happening to the villages. But the smuggling and the court and the monks and like the religious element, those aren't things that appeal to me. I don't know, they just don't sound interesting. They're not things I enjoy reading about. So it makes me a bit cautious, like, am I going to enjoy it? Because I don't like those sorts of things in books. But I might be surprised. I might be proven wrong that actually I've been avoiding those books for no reason and it is something I can enjoy in a book. I mean, I'll just have to read it and find out. That is the only way to know. So before I start a book, I use the StoryGraph analysis tool. It is a little AI generated summary. It analyzes books that you have read before alongside themes, tropes and reviews, and tells you if it thinks you will enjoy that book or not. I always find it really interesting to have a look at going into a book because it gives me a better idea of what to expect, and then at the end I can compare my thoughts to what StoryGraph thought. It's just a bit of fun. Let's have a look at what StoryGraph thinks about this book for me. So the aspects that it thinks I will enjoy are quite vague. So the magic element, the adventurous mood, and the fact that it's a fantasy genre. That is quite vague. That's not a lot to go off. Yes, I enjoy magic. Yes, I enjoy an adventurous theme, and yes, I like fantasy, but that it doesn't give me much, so I'm a little apprehensive. And will I enjoy those things in an adult book? Because yes, I enjoy those things in a YA, but it's going to be given to me differently in an adult book, so still a bit up in the air. The aspects it thinks that I won't like are the fact that it's a romance genre, the love triangle theme, and cults. So if you saw my last reading vlog, which if you didn't, I will link it up there. It's me reading the Twin Crowns series. I really didn't like the love triangle element. I really didn't enjoy it. It's what held the series back for me. So the fact that this again features a love triangle, oh, I just don't enjoy it. It isn't for me. So that does make me really nervous. Romance, again, I don't like it if a book is very romance heavy. I just want the plot. I want the fantasy. I don't want the love. It icks me out. I'm just not here for it. It's not for me. But whatevs, it's in every book. At this point, I don't know what to expect. But then the cults part, I find really bizarre because I've not read many books with cults and I've not rated them one way or another. Like, I've read a couple and enjoyed them. It wasn't the cult element that made me enjoy it, but it just seemed really bizarre that it specifically said cults. Like, why would I not enjoy cults? I've not enjoyed them before. So maybe it was just because it's not a highly featured trope in my best loved books that it's saying it. But I don't know, I just found it a bit bizarre because I don't care for it one way or another. It's not something I really look for in a book and I really like. But it's also not something I dislike or avoid. It's just there. So we'll see. I don't feel like I'm gonna have a strong opinion on the cult either way. And also, what cult? Where is the cult? There was nothing on the blurb about a cult. So that actually just makes me even more intrigued to read it, to know what on earth it's on about. And then on the bigger analysis, it says I might enjoy The Foxglove King. Doesn't give me much more than that. Just I might enjoy it. So I'm not sure either way. The only way to know is to read this book. So I'm just gonna have to dive in and figure it out for myself. So So let's get reading, and I will update you when I have more to share and I have some more conclusive thoughts. See you soon. I have DNF'd this book. Oh, a way to start this vlog. I have DNF'd the Foxglove King. I will go through my notes that I made while I was reading this book rather than just diving straight into why I DNF'd. So that way you have a fuller picture for my thoughts on this book. So I immediately liked the writing style of this book. It is a really good example of showing and not telling. I have heard people on BookTube talk about showing and not telling writing styles. I never really understood what it meant. But I think because this is an adult book, its differences to the YA books that I usually read are glaringly obvious. So instead of just telling us certain information, it gives us other information and lets us figure it out for ourselves. So the example I'm going to give is when we are first introduced to the main character, Law. It tells us about her scars, and she is basically like seducing somebody, not really seducing someone, but she's trying to be all like, to someone, and it's telling us that she has scars. But rather than telling us why she has these scars, how she got them, it just tells us that they're there. And then that allowed me to come to my own conclusions. And it painted a picture of Law that maybe she's quite adventurous, she's got into a few scrapes, a little bit of like rough and tumble, and it gives me an idea of who she is from that information. Whereas in a YA book, it would probably just say like, Law has these scars and this is how she got them. Whereas I don't know how she got them. It's not mentioned at this point. We haven't got that information, but it paints a picture of who she is. We are shown who Law is, not told. So I really enjoyed that. I didn't feel like I was being spoon-fed information, and it let me come to my own conclusions. There was some sex worker positivity in this book. It was a throwaway comment, but I really appreciated its inclusion, and I think we need more of that in books. So at around the 10% mark, I switched to audiobook. I knew at this point that I wasn't going to sit down for long periods of time to get lost in this book. It just wasn't something I felt myself getting lost in. So the audiobook would help me get through this book faster. The plot got going quite quickly. We were introduced to the Prescamore in the first couple of chapters, and it's mentioned on the blurb that she gets caught by them, and that happens really fast. So it really does get stuck into the plot. I was intrigued when we met the Prescamore, but I wasn't gripped. And then we were given so much information about the world and the magic system and the different like places, and I just got a little bit overwhelmed by it. We were just given a lot and I didn't really care. Like, I wasn't captivated, and I just didn't care. There was a revelation that came that I quite enjoyed. I had to reread it a couple of times because, like I said, I was listening via audiobook and there was a reveal and I was like, wait, did I hear that right? And I went back and I was like, oh yeah, I did. Like, oh, that's really interesting. But I just didn't feel that like urge, that pull to keep reading. So that's when I decided to DNF, and it wasn't something that like I ummed and ahed about. I literally thought, should I DNF this? And then I did. It was like a really quick decision. I just thought, yeah, why not? Like, I'm not invested. I wasn't feeling the magic system. I wasn't feeling the writing. I think it's fair to predict that this probably would have been like a 2.5 or a 3-star read. Something that was like, yeah, that was okay, but it wasn't like a really, really enjoyable time. So in summary, the overload of information about the magic system and also the writing style are the reasons why I DNF'd this book. I think I like really fairy tale-esque, flowery, pretty writing in books. I think that's what I need, because the plot for this was interesting. I was interested in death magic. I was interested to find out what was happening with the villages, but the writing just seemed a bit like bland for me. And I know some people don't mind that in a book, but for me, I want pretty flowery writing. I want descriptions. I want metaphors. I want imagery. I like that sort of writing. And from what I'm gathering, maybe that isn't typical for adult fantasy books. If you do know any adult fantasy books that have that sort of writing, then please let me know, because I would really like to read them. And I think that's what I need in order to commit to an adult fantasy. If it had that sort of writing, or if this was a YA, I think I would have enjoyed it much more and I would have actually finished it. I'm glad I picked up this book. It has taught me something about my reading preferences. and it's highlighted that YA is where I get the most enjoyment, but I don't yet think all hope is lost for adult fantasy. I just think this one wasn't for me, and that's okay. I'm not the biggest adult fantasy reader. I need to find my feet with it a little bit more. After I DNF'd this, I did actually go back and look through my list of my all-time favourite books to see how many adult fantasies there were, and surprisingly there was an even split. I think there was one more YA than there was adult, but that does show that I can enjoy an adult fantasy, and I have loved adult fantasy, so all hope isn't lost there. I just need to find my feet a little bit more with it. So that was my reading experience with the Foxglove King. Let's get on into my next read. So the next FairyLoot book I will be picking up is Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young. After DNFing the last book, I am a little bit hesitant going into another adult, but I do think this one is going to be different because it seems to be a lighter fantasy and it has a bigger mystery element, so I think it's going to be quite easygoing. It just has a different tone. So this book is set on the fictional island of Sersha and our main character Emery. So this book is set on the fictional island of Sersha and it follows main character Emery. When Emery was a teenager, her best friend Lily was murdered and the love of her life August was accused. Years later, the island starts acting strange and she knows something is about to happen. August has returned to the island for the first time in 14 years and he is definitely not welcome. But all is not as it seems, and hidden truths and buried secrets threaten to reveal the truth behind Lily's death. This plot does sound really good. It sounds like a good old mystery, and I do love mysteries. I need to read more, and I tend not to read sort of like domestic-y style mysteries that are about like a couple or a relationship or a family, those sorts of things. But because this is a fantasy and it isn't clear where the fantasy element is, but the fantasy element is making me more willing to give this book a go because it's not just your standard murder mystery type story. There is a magical element in there somewhere and I'm really intrigued to find out where. It doesn't sound too heavy, it doesn't sound too convoluted. I'm expecting this to be a really good time. StoryGraph agrees with me on that and it says the aspects that I will enjoy are the magic, the mystery and the small town secrets vibe, whereas the romance element and the pacing are the things it thinks I won't enjoy. So the romance, I'm gonna guess, is gonna unfold between August and Emery. I'm yet to find out. I presume that's where it's going to go. Like I've said, romance isn't really for me, but we'll see how prominent the romance storyline is and if it is a problem for me. And then the pacing scares me. I very much enjoy fast-paced. I can tolerate medium-paced, but it needs to be on the faster side. Whereas slow pacing, which is what StoryGraph says this is, scare me. I am hesitant. Slow pace is not for me unless it has really beautiful writing and it builds this beautiful picture. That's the only time I can deal with slow pace. So we will just have to see. There is the very real possibility that I will DNF this if it is too slow, because if I am not gripped, I don't want to pick you up. And if I have, say, 2 hours free and I am not wanting to pick up my book, that's usually when I DNF because I want to read. I love to read. So if I am not wanting to pick up my current read, then there is a problem. And I'm not going to force myself to read something. I've said it in my other vlogs. I will not force myself to read books I'm not enjoying purely for a video. That's not the type of person I am. Reading is my hobby. I'm not going to force myself to have a unenjoyable reading experience for the sake of a video. So there is the possibility I'll DNF, but the only way that we can find out is if I give this book a go. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and read and I will update you as soon as I have some thoughts. Fingers crossed that there is not a second DNF in this video, because that would be tragic. Hello, I have popped in to tell you I have finished Spells for Forgetting. I know I said I would update you at the quarterly mark, but time just ran away with me and I didn't get the chance, and I finished it quite quickly. Well, it took me 4 days, so realistically at any point over those 4 days I probably could have updated you, but I didn't. I have just not really been in the mood to film. I've been tired. I've been prioritising sleep these past couple of days. StoryGraph have a streak feature where you need to read every single day to maintain your streak. You can alter your settings to dictate what the streak is. So for some, I think the automatic setting is 1 page a day. I have set mine to 10 pages a day or 10 minutes a day. I have lost my streak. It was at 18 days. That's obviously going from last year as well into this year. I really wanted to maintain my streak, but there were just some days where I was like, I need to prioritize sleep and rest over reading, and I feel so much better for it because it means I'm not forcing myself to read when I'm really not feeling up to it, and then when I do get the chance to pick up my book, I'm enjoying it a lot more. So although it took me 4 days to finish the book, I wasn't reading every single day, so I think I got to 25%, and then I read pretty much the rest of it on another day, so it wasn't evenly read over those 4 days. So yeah, that's why I haven't updated you to this point, and I think that's okay. I think it's definitely okay to prioritize my well-being over reading updates. So what I'll do is I'll go through the notes that I made while I was reading the book. StoryGraph also have a reading journal, so you can update what percentage you're at and then make some little notes. I do that regularly while I'm reading a book, so I'll just go through those notes and then you'll get a good picture of my thoughts, and then at the end we'll talk about my overall view and the rating. So on the very first page, I started to get the suspicion that this was dual perspective, because on the blurb it's focusing a lot about Emery, and I thought we were going to follow Emery's perspective, but chapter 1 is actually following August. So I was thinking this is going to be dual perspective, which I was a little bit like, I'm not the biggest fan of dual perspective, but it's not a deal breaker. It's not okay, this isn't for me. It's just not something I actively enjoy. And I did really like the writing style. From the first page, the way that August was talking about the island and his thoughts of it were really captivating. It was a really nice writing style, and I immediately felt like I was going to enjoy reading the book because of how it is written. It's my kind of style. It's very descriptive, a lot of imagery, lots of pretty metaphors, the kind of thing that I like to read. So I was really pleased about that. At the 1% mark, I made a note on StoryGraph and it just says, does this have witches in it? With a little like side eye emoji, because there was a little mention of like, magic and someone's mum doing like spells and reading tea leaves, and I was like, witches? I didn't know this had witches in it, so I was a bit like, oh, a bit excited by that. Then when we started to learn more about the magic, it became apparent that this is about witches, but it's not actively about witches. It's just the people who live on this island have magic, they practice witchcraft, but the story isn't focusing on witches. They are just featured. There are witches on this island and magic is practiced. It gave me really cozy vibes. I started to feel like this was going to be quite a cozy mystery with the really lovely writing and that small town magic vibe. I was really looking forward to that. It's set in autumn, so it has that really like cozy autumnal feel, which I really liked. Then at the 15% mark, it became apparent that this is not dual perspective, it's multiple perspective. And that did affect my reading experience. We were mainly following August and Emery, but then we also had chapters from other people's perspective who live on the island. And I struggled with that a little bit. It did definitely affect my reading experience and my enjoyment of this book, because I felt like I wasn't really connecting with anyone because we were following so many different people and swapping and changing perspectives, and we were getting the story from so many people's point of views. I wasn't connecting with anyone. I did find that I didn't care about Emery or August or any of the other characters because I wasn't given enough time with them to really root for them or care about what was going on or have any sort of emotional connection. So that was a shame. The multiple perspective part definitely wasn't for me in this book. And every time I turned a page and the heading was a new character's name, and I was thinking like, who are you? And then I'd read it and then I'd have to like just check quickly like whose perspective this was, because we'd had so many. And when I mean so many, I think maybe like 6, potentially more different people's perspectives, and it just felt too much for me. So at the 25% mark, I definitely understood what StoryGraph meant by the slow pacing of this book. I felt like nothing had happened. We'd not really progressed in the plot. We'd not learned anything new about the mystery. There was no intrigue. I just felt like, what have I been reading? Like, what has happened? That isn't to say I wasn't enjoying it. I just sort of reflected on the fact that it had been very slow, but it didn't feel like a slow build, like we were slowly building. It just felt like nothing had happened at this point, and I wanted more. I wanted to be really hooked into the mystery and feel some sort of tension or something to do with the mystery, but I didn't. I just I felt a bit nothingy at this point. So I wrote, I'm not loving this book, but I'm also not hating it. I'm sitting somewhere comfortably in the middle. Then at the 33% mark, I wrote a note and I just put, whose perspective don't we get in this book? Geez, there are a lot of perspectives in this. I wish I'd known that going in. And as I just touched on, that was the case. There were a lot of perspectives. It did take me out of the story quite a lot. This definitely wasn't a mystery in the traditional sense that I'm used to reading, where we're getting lots of reveals, lots of little breadcrumbs, little things sprinkled in here and there. You start to build up a picture, then you start to question yourself. It definitely wasn't that. We just got like tiny bits of information, but there was no intrigue along with it. There were no like jaw-dropping moments of like, what? Like I didn't connect at all to this book. So when we were given like a little bit of information, it didn't hit, like it didn't have any impact because I wasn't connecting with the story. I can't really explain it. It just, the connection wasn't there and the mystery element just wasn't strong enough for me to say like, yeah, this is a mystery. You're really going to focus on the mystery element. Like it's there. It's obviously the plot, but it was, it wasn't there. It didn't hit. Then just after the 53% mark, I'm pretty sure there was a sex scene between two 16-year-olds. And I don't know if it's just me, but it made me really uncomfortable. Like it was a flashback of something that had happened between two adults now, but when they were children. And the opening line of that chapter was like, we were 16, but just barely. So these are like, not even like almost 17, these are like days after turning 16-year-olds. And I don't know, I think it was supposed to be like romantic and this like childhood love and that deep connection that they had, and this was like serious love even though they were children. It was very like deep, but it just made me really uncomfortable. And it wasn't like graphic, but there were like descriptive moments, and like there was just one line and I just reread it a couple of times like, am I really reading that? Like that's quite, it made me uncomfortable. I didn't get the romantic cute vibes. I was just so very aware that I was reading about children, and yes, in the UK 16 is the age of consent, but they are still children, and I'm a 27-year-old, well I'm not, I'm almost 27, and as an almost 27-year-old woman, I didn't want to read about two children having sex. It made me uncomfortable. I didn't like it. For the last half of the book, the mystery kept unfolding. We got more and more different perspectives to give us more answers, and we would, in one chapter, we would learn something about a character and then we'd switch to their perspective and learn more about the story. And it was kind of like a follow the leader type situation. So it would be like, oh, this character did it, and then the next chapter would be that character, and they'd be like, oh well, this is actually what happened, and it was this character. And do you know what I mean? Like it was sort of like a trail leading on, but like I said, it felt very disjointed, switching perspectives so often, and it took me out of the book. The only way I could describe it is like, you know, in singing when there's staccato and it's just like that. It just felt like start, stop. There was no like continuous flow of story. It wasn't for me. It wasn't my vibe. It's not what I enjoy in a story. It really took me out. I felt like I didn't care about the mystery. I didn't care about the characters. I didn't care about the plot. The magic that I loved so much at the beginning, for like the middle section of the book, was absent. Like we didn't get any more exploration of that magic. It didn't feature much. We didn't get any of that until the end. In the last sort of 25%, we got more about the magic, but it was absent for most of the book. So that initial like cozy small town magic witchcraft vibe that I got in the first couple of chapters left. So when StoryGraph said like, you're gonna love the small town vibe, you're gonna love the magic, I did when it was there, but for the most part it wasn't. So I gave this book a 2.5 stars, which is really low. I thought in those first couple of chapters, I thought this could be a 4-star, and then when those vibes went, and I just thought, I didn't care. For all of the reasons that I've said, I'm not going to repeat them, but it just didn't work for me. I found that I was only reading on to get closure for the mystery, just so I was like, I knew what happened. I didn't actually care. It was just sort of, well, I may as well read on. And I do think if I hadn't DNF'd the previous book in this video, I may have DNF'd this one too, but I just sort of felt like I'll just finish it. It wasn't too much effort to finish. There was a lot of dialogue towards the end of the book as they're figuring out the mystery, so it felt an easier read in the last half. So I just thought, well, I may as well finish it, and I did. I didn't enjoy it. I'm not going to read from Adrian Young again. This vlog has not been successful so far. I've had a DNF and a 2.5, but both of those have been the adult books, and this isn't giving me much hope for adult fantasy. It isn't making me think I want to step out of my comfort zone again, but I will. I'm going to keep trying. I will find the perfect adult fantasy book for me. I will. It just wasn't this one. But if anyone can recommend some of those small town cozy magic type vibes that the beginning of this book gave, then please leave me some recommendations in the comments, because I did really like that part. It just didn't continue throughout the story, and if it had, I think I would have enjoyed it more. So yeah, that is the second book on this video done. Not great so far, is it? Let's go into the next one. So the next book that I am going to be reading, and the last book I am going to be reading in this vlog, is The Crimson Moth by Kristen Cicerelli. This is a YA, so I have hopes for this book. I do have hope for this book. Although it features a lot of things that I usually avoid, I just have a gut feeling that this book is going to be for me. But we'll get into that a little bit more in this section. First, I will tell you what this book is about. So this is an enemies to lovers fantasy following a witch and a witch hunter. I have read a very similar themed book before in Serpent and Dove. That was a witch and a witch hunter romance book, and I really enjoyed it. It actually has a place on my shelf. I liked that book for some reason, despite it not ticking any of my usual boxes and featuring a lot of things I usually avoid. I enjoyed it. So I'm thinking maybe this book I will enjoy too. So in this book we follow Rune, who poses as a shallow, vacant socialite, and actually she is a vigilante witch. And in this society that they live in this world, witchcraft is banned. They kill witches. Witches used to sit on the throne, but they were executed, murdered, and anyone who is now caught as a witch is captured and killed. So Rune is a witch. She is practicing in secret, and during the night she is helping witches escape this city, this wherever they are, hence being a vigilante witch. She is a witch helping other witches escape and go undetected. And in order to continue her ruse as a socialite, she decides to court the ruthless head of the Blood Guard. The Blood Guard is who hunt down the witches. He is said to be the most brutal, ruthless witch killer of them all, and she decides to court him to, one, keep up her disguise, and to get intel on the witches that are being captured. This sounds very similar to Serpent and Dove, so I have managed to get a ebook from my library for this one. So for some reason, I cannot tell you what, I have really been anticipating this book. I have really wanted to get to this book. I don't know why. It does not seem like my kind of book. Yes, it's the witchcraft. The witchcraft is always going to be a win, but the vigilante, the guard, the court, the soldiery, king, queen vibe isn't my cup of tea. And I don't tend to like very action heavy books, and books that have soldiers and vigilantes and courts seem to have quite an action heavy narrative, and I get lost in those sorts of books. I can't keep up with what I'm being told in the book. I'm the same in films. If there's loads of fighting and loads of action, I can't visualize very well. It's one of the reasons that I thought I might be autistic, because I cannot visualize what I'm reading sometimes. And I realized this the other day. If you give me a description of a character, I can only visualize one of those things at a time. When I was reading Twin Crowns, it described his hair, his eyes, and his mouth, and I could only visualize his hair. And then when I tried to visualize his eyes, I can't pair them with his hair. I can't visualize a character that you described to me. And it's the same with action. So if you're saying he punched this way and she ducked that way and then flipped her arm around, do you know what I mean? That sort of thing, I can't visualize, I can't follow it. And I think that's why I avoid this stuff in books, because like I've said in other videos, I enjoy things like Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, those sorts of films. I know they were books first, but in TV and film, I enjoy those. But in books, I struggle. So I think it's that. I think it's my lack of ability to visualize that puts me off. So everything about this book says I'm not going to enjoy it, but there is a pull in me to this book. It's like a gut feeling that I literally cannot describe. As soon as I saw this book, I added it to my wish list. I have been actively checking for it to go on sale, and as soon as I saw it at my library, I reserved it. And I have loads of books on my library wish list, and I'm waiting for them to come up on my TBR generator rather than just reading them straight away. I'm waiting for my TBR generator to say I can read them. This one, I didn't do this. I immediately reserved it, and I planned videos in order to fit this book in. So there is clearly like a pull. This is a highly anticipated book of mine, and I can't tell you why. It is literally a gut feeling. But let's go through StoryGraph's analysis of this book for me. I'm a bit confused by this analysis, I'm not gonna lie. So the aspects that it thinks I will like, the first two are witches, which we have established, an absolute yes, and the adventurous mood. Those are wins for me. They are always wins. I will pretty much read anything with witches in it, and I like an adventurous mood in my fantasy. The third one is enemies to lovers, which is so bizarre because that has been listed as a reason I won't enjoy books in other books. So I don't know why it's now saying this is something I'm going to enjoy. Maybe it is. Maybe I do enjoy enemies to lovers. I wouldn't actively list it as something I look for in a book, but maybe it is. StoryGraph seems to think it is. And when I'm thinking about some books that I've enjoyed in the past that have romance elements, some of them were enemies to lovers, like the one in Twin Crowns. I enjoyed that. Serpent and Dove, I enjoyed that. So maybe I do. Maybe I like enemies to lovers. Maybe StoryGraph knows me better than I do. But yeah, that one just caught me off guard a little bit. But other than that, I agree with StoryGraph on the aspects that I will like. Then the aspects that I might not like, again, I agree. So the romance, again, as I said, don't seek romance out in books, but that doesn't mean I hate it in every single book. It's just something I'd prefer not to be there. A love triangle, please don't give me a love triangle. I beg this book not to give me a love triangle because I hate them. I hate love triangles. I did not know this had a love triangle going into it. I really, really hope that does not affect my enjoyment. And the third one is the secret identity / vigilante trope, which, like I've stated, that is correct. That is something I avoid. So I agree with the aspects that I won't like, and I partially agree with the aspects it thinks I will like. I really, really, really hope to God the love triangle element is not that prominent, because it will kill my enjoyment for this book. At least I think it will. It has in every other book I've read, so I don't see why this one would be different. Where is my voice going? So then StoryGraph takes those aspects and basically tells you whether it thinks you will or will not enjoy it. And when I read this last night, when I was making my little notes, I laughed out loud at this one. I actually cackled, and it was quite awkward because my partner was reading next to me and she got to a really sad bit in her book and then I just burst out laughing. But it just says very bad. I'll read it to you word for word, but it says, based on your reading history, the Crimson Moth appears to contain the very bad aspects which you've said you dislike. And I just laughed because, one, that phrasing is just ridiculous, and two, this book is one of my most anticipated reads and it thinks I'm going to hate it. So we're just gonna have to read it and find out. There's nothing else I can do. I have high hopes. Let's see if this book lives up to those hopes. I will see you again when I have an update. Goodbye. Hello. So, okay, I've done it again. I have finished the book without updating you. I will work on that, I promise. I really enjoyed this book, but before we get into my final thoughts and my rating, I will go through the book section by section like I did with the last book. So I was immediately hooked by this book. The writing was great, the characters were great, the plot was great. I wasn't at all put off by the higher fantasy elements of this book, and I found myself fully immersed from the very first page. So this book was actually dual perspective. So we followed Rune, who is the witch, and Gideon, who is the witch hunter. And I actually liked the fact that this was dual perspective, which is something you might be surprised to hear me say, as in my other vlogs and in this video I've been saying that I haven't been liking dual or multi-perspective, but I think it actually really worked for this book. We got their unique perspective on everything and it helped really flesh them out, and it also really helped me connect with the romance. And because I felt more connected to the characters, it made me enjoy the romance element more. It was really fast paced. The plot kicked off from the first page and was developing constantly. It didn't feel info dumpy at all. The information that we needed about the world and the magic system was kind of like sprinkled in. We were given it in small chunks, and that made it a lot easier to digest. I didn't feel overwhelmed. I didn't feel confused. I started to build a bigger picture of everything as we were going. So I really enjoyed that, especially as in this video, I have DNF'd a book that was just too info dumpy and I couldn't digest all the information being given to me fast enough. So this was a really positive change. So then we go into the 25 to 50% section of the book, and there was one thing that I noticed that I found a little bit odd, and it was that information was being repeatedly given to us. I can't go into spoiler territory and tell you what it was, but we were just given a bit of information and I was like, okay, yeah, cool, I get that. And then maybe like 10 pages later, it was given to us again. And then maybe like 20 pages later, we were given it again. And I just thought, like, why are you reiterating the same thing that was seemingly irrelevant? And obviously now that I finished the book, it still didn't feel relevant. So it wasn't like it was like a reminder of, oh, just bear this in mind for later. It just felt a bit strange. It took me out of the story a little bit because I was like, haven't we been told that before? And it was the same thing about maybe 4 or 5 times. We were given this one little snippet of information, and yeah, it felt a little bit odd. I actually enjoyed the enemies to lovers trope in this. At some points, it did feel a little bit over the top, and I had to suspend my disbelief a little bit, because if you focus too hard on the fact that these two hate each other at the beginning, it brings into question the whole validity of the romance. You kind of have to just turn a blind eye a little bit, because it's really hammered home at the beginning. Like, these two hate each other, and they have very valid reasons for doing so. And then you expect me to believe they're just gonna like throw all that away and fall in love? Like, no. So you do kind of have to take it with a little bit of pinch of salt, and I did, and I enjoyed it. I did feel a little bit insta-lovey at parts, but I chose to look past that, and I did enjoy it. Then going into the 50 to 75% point of the book, I was utterly obsessed. Everything that I mentioned Everything I mentioned at the beginning was still going strong. The writing, the plot, the characters, it was all still there. It was all still great. I was starting to feel a little bit nervous about this love triangle that had been mentioned by StoryGraph, and just waiting for that to come in and ruin everything. So I was a little bit on edge, but really enjoying myself and having a good time. The atmosphere stayed really, really tense, but I just got utterly lost in the book. So lost that I actually finished the book without even realising I'd passed the 75% mark. I just flew through it. I have to admit, I liked the love triangle element. It wasn't really a love triangle in the traditional sense, which I think is why I liked it. It made sense to the plot. It felt like it had a place. It felt realistic. It felt believable. So I wasn't hating it. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. I'm here for it. So I do kind of wish StoryGraph hadn't called it a love triangle, because I wouldn't say it is a love triangle. Well, I suppose it kind of is, but not in the sense of other books that I've read that are a love triangle. It didn't really fit the same narrative that it has in other books. Like, yes, it is a love triangle, but no, it is not a love triangle. I can't really say much more because it's spoilers, and I don't want to spoil this book for anyone, but I just wouldn't go into it expecting a traditional love triangle the way that I did. And like I said, I was pleasantly surprised that it wasn't that. One thing I will say is that when I finished it, I wasn't feeling the urge to pick up the next book. So this is a duology. The second book has been released in paperback and hardback in the UK, but not Kindle. So I can't read the second book now anyway. But even if I could, like, I just wasn't feeling that pull, because all of the plot development that led into the second book happened in the last quarter. It wasn't building up throughout the book. The book was mainly focusing on the romance element, and then at the end we got some more like information, and that's going to carry on into book 2. But because it was given to us at the end, I just didn't feel compelled to carry on reading. And realistically, if this book doesn't go down to 99p anytime soon, then I'm not going to pick it up. I'm the type of person who likes to read a series like all at once. When I finish the first book, I want to read the second book. I don't like there being a massive gap. Obviously, if the book's not released, then I don't have a choice. But if it is released and it's easily obtainable, then I'm going to read the series all in one. The sequel comes out next month, and I've made the decision not to pre-order it because I just don't care enough. I will add it to my wish list. If it goes down to like 99p, 1.99, something like that, then I will pick it up, but there is no guarantee that that will happen or when. That could be in like 3 years. We just don't know. So that's where I'm at the moment, that I am not going to pick up the second book unless it's like really easily obtainable. Maybe if it goes to my library, I will get it. But other than that, I don't see myself picking up book number 2. So with all of that being said, I gave this book a 4.5 stars. I think that's a great way to end this video because the other 2 books, let's face it, were flops. There wasn't anything I really disliked about this book, which is why it got such a high rating. I really enjoyed the plot, the characters, the writing style. Like I've said, I enjoyed so many elements about this book. But then the fact that I'm not fussed about picking up the second book is what stops this from being a 5 stars. There is clearly something missing. The fact that the plot developed very quickly at the end of the book didn't really work for me. If the story had unfolded earlier in this book and developed throughout, then I think I would have been like really gripped, really hooked, really anticipating the next book, and that would have made it a 5 stars for me. So we've had really mixed results from this vlog. We started with a DNF, followed by a measly 2.5 stars, and then finished on a high note with a 4.5. The 2 books from the adult boxes were misses for me, which worries me a little bit going forward, but the book from the YA box was an absolute hit. So today I have read 11 YA FairyLoot books. 2 got 3 stars, 5 got 4 stars, 3 got 4.5 stars, and 1 was a DNF. That feels like a relatively good success rate so far. Whereas for the adult box, I have read 8 of those books and 5 of them have been DNFs. 1 got 2.5 stars, 1 got 3 stars, and 1 got 4 stars. So far the adult books are not going well for me. So I do feel like this vlog has been a little bit of a fail. And despite the fact that Crimson Moth was a 4.5 stars, it was already on my radar. I would have picked it up regardless of it being a FairyLoot book. So this vlog has been a fail in terms of finding new favourites and reading things out of my comfort zone or off my radar. So far, I haven't found anything new to me that I have loved. I have learnt some really valuable things about my reading preferences though. From reading Foxglove King, I have realised that my adult fantasy books need to be a bit more light-hearted and less information heavy. And Spells for Forgetting has shown me that I like cosy mystery, especially that small town magical vibe, but that vibe needs to be consistent throughout, and multiple perspective isn't really for me. The Crimson Moth has taught me that I like enemies to lovers books when done in a fantasy setting and when done well, and that I like adventurous YA fantasies, so I need to pick up some more. And I do think I am getting more and more comfortable the more of these vlogs I am doing with reading YA fantasy. I have done some other vlogs where I've read books out of my comfort zone, they just didn't happen to be for BookBox books. So I am learning that I like YA fantasy. I am just a little bit picky, but I need to read more out of my comfort zone because I am finding favourites. And as I said, Crimson Moth, although it was one that I highly anticipated and I wanted to read, it does not tick any of my usual boxes. It is a little bit of a wild card for me, and the fact that it was a successful wild card, I need to enunciate more. It sounds like I'm saying wild card. I am saying wild card, I'm just not enunciating properly. But yeah, the fact that that was a wild card and it was successful shows that I can read books. And I should be reading more books that maybe intimidate me a little or contain elements that I don't usually gravitate towards, because I can enjoy them. And realistically, if I've paid 99p for a Kindle book and I don't enjoy it, it's not the end of the world. So please let me know down below your thoughts on these 3 books. Have you read any of them and what did you think of them? I'm really looking forward to doing another one of these videos. I might do a different book box next. It just depends on what comes up on my TBR, so we will have to see. If you'd like to see future vlogs like this one, then please subscribe and hopefully I will see you again soon. Goodbye.